What if I told you that one of the boldest rivalries in business history wasn't a tea fought with weapons, but with sugar, bubbles, and psychology? Imagine two titans of taste, locked in a century-long battle for your loyalty, your wallet, and even your memories. Coca-Cola and Pepsi. On paper, they sell the same thing: sweet, fizzy drinks. But the choice between them is never neutral. Coca-Cola didn't just outsell Pepsi. It embedded itself into identity and ritual, while Pepsi, despite flashes of brilliance, kept chasing. Why did Pepsi lose ground? And what lessons about branding and psychology can we learn? Before we dive in, hit the like button and subscribe. It helps me keep bringing you fascinating breakdowns like this. The story begins in the late 19th century. Coca-Cola was born in 1886 in Atlanta, Georgia, when pharmacist John Pemberton mixed syrup with carbonated water. Pepsi followed in 1893, created by Caleb Bradham in North Carolina. Both were pitched as health tonics. At this stage, neither was dominant, but Coca-Cola focused on consistency, identity, and distribution, while Pepsi stumbled through bankruptcies. By the early 1900s, Coke wasn't just a drink, it was an idea. Pepsi's struggles left it playing catch-up. Pepsi went bankrupt twice in its first decades, losing crucial time. Meanwhile, Coca-Cola expanded bottling networks and became the default soda. Ordering a Coke became shorthand for ordering any soda. Coke had become a category in itself. Pepsi had to fight not just for customers, but for relevance. Still, Pepsi refused to die. During the Great Depression, it found an opening. Coke sold 6.5-ounce bottles for a nickel. Pepsi offered 12 ounces for the same price. In an era of scarcity, that mattered. Their jingle, "Twice as much for a nickel too," boosted sales. Pepsi had positioned itself as the drink of the budget-conscious outsider. But this strategy planted a trap. Building a brand on price makes you vulnerable to being undercut, and it doesn't build aspiration. Coke sold something deeper: happiness, belonging, moments. Opening a Coke wasn't just thirst. It was connecting with something larger. That difference in narrative proved decisive. By the 1940s, Coca-Cola expanded globally through World War II. The company promised every U.S. soldier a Coke for 5 cents, no matter where they were. Coke became a taste of home, a patriotic symbol. Soldiers returned associating Coke with America itself. Pepsi had no comparable story. Branding, after all, is never just about the product, it's about the story around it. In the 1960s, Pepsi tried a new angle: youth. With the Pepsi Generation campaign, Pepsi wasn't just a soda. It was rebellion, modernity, for the young and restless. Coke was tradition. Pepsi was tomorrow. Ads showed glamorous, energetic youth. Pepsi became cool. For once, Coke looked old-fashioned. Then came the Pepsi Challenge in the 1970s and 1980s. Blind taste tests showed most people preferred Pepsi's sweeter flavor. It was a marketing explosion. Pepsi claimed scientific proof of superiority. Coke panicked. In 1985, it launched New Coke, a sweeter formula closer to Pepsi. The move backfired spectacularly. Customers revolted, hotlines flooded, protest groups formed. Coke had underestimated loyalty. People weren't attached to taste, but to the identity of Coke. Within months, Coca-Cola Classic returned. Ironically, the fiasco strengthened Coke, reminding consumers how much they cared. The Pepsi Challenge revealed something crucial. Yes, in sip tests, Pepsi's sweetness won. But branding isn't built on sips, it's built on whole experiences. A can of Pepsi could feel cloying, while Coke's balanced flavor endured. More importantly, Coke carried emotional weight. Pepsi had the edge in momentary taste. Coke had the edge in identity. And identity is far more powerful. Still, Pepsi doubled down on culture. In the 1980s and 1990s, it signed celebrities like Michael Jackson, Madonna, and Britney Spears. Pepsi was pop culture, loud, flashy, of the moment. Coke, meanwhile, stayed timeless. The red can, the Santa Claus ads, the polar bears. Coke was tradition. Pepsi was trends. The problem with trends is they fade. Coke became the backdrop of life. Pepsi chased the spotlight. By the 2000s, this gap widened. Coca-Cola became a staple worldwide, especially in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Coke wasn't just a drink, it was woven into daily life. Pepsi, by contrast, often wasn't seen as a true rival, just the other option if Coke wasn't available. Pepsi's challenges were worsened by strategy. By the 2010s, PepsiCo leaned heavily into its snack empire: Lay's, Doritos, Gatorade. Beverages became just one part of the business. Coke, in contrast, stayed laser-focused on drinks, diversifying within beverages but never blurring its core. Pepsi's identity weakened. Was it soda? Snacks? Both? In branding, clarity matters, and Pepsi lost it. This identity crisis showed in marketing too. Remember the 2017 Kendall Jenner ad? It portrayed a protest resolved by handing a police officer a Pepsi. It was meant to be edgy and relevant, but came off tone-deaf and trivializing. Backlash was swift. It symbolized Pepsi's problem. In chasing relevance, it often stumbled into irrelevance. Coke rarely made such mistakes because it wasn't chasing the news cycle. It was building timeless associations with family, holidays, and everyday joy. So what does this rivalry teach us? It's not just about soda. It's about branding and psychology. Pepsi often won battles: cheaper bottles, cooler ads, celebrity deals. But Coca-Cola won the war by owning something Pepsi never captured: emotional permanence. Coke became more than a drink, it became ritual. Fireworks on the 4th of July, Christmas with family, a road trip with friends. Coke positioned itself as part of life itself. Pepsi was always an accessory. Coke was the main event. But to truly understand why Pepsi lost ground, we need to zoom in on the psychology of choice. Most people assume they choose drinks based on taste. That's what the Pepsi challenge seemed to prove. But in reality, taste is only one small piece of the puzzle. Think about the last time you ordered a soda at a restaurant. Did you carefully weigh the flavors in your mind? Or did you just say, "I'll take a Coke," almost automatically? That unconscious choice is the gold every brand is chasing, and Coke owns it. Once a brand becomes the default in people's minds, breaking that habit is almost impossible. Pepsi tried to break it with stunts and comparisons. Coke reinforced it with consistency. Consistency is boring on the surface, but it's deadly powerful. Coca-Cola rarely changed its logo. Its can design evolved slowly, always keeping that red and white script. Its taste, aside from the new Coke debacle, remained virtually untouched. That stability built trust. People knew exactly what they were getting. Pepsi, meanwhile, kept tinkering. Different logos, different slogans, constant reinventions. In fact, Pepsi has changed its logo more than 10 times in its history. Coke, only a handful. Every time Pepsi rebranded, it signaled uncertainty. Every time Coke stayed the same, it signaled confidence. In branding, confidence breeds loyalty. Now let's add another layer. Coca-Cola didn't just market a product, it marketed values. Think about the Christmas ads. Santa Claus, smiling with a Coke in hand. Polar bears, cozying up by the fire. These weren't about refreshment. They were about warmth, family, tradition. Coke tapped into timeless emotions that transcended generations. Pepsi, on the other hand, hitched itself to fleeting cultural icons. Michael Jackson was huge, until scandals. Britney Spears was massive, until she faded. Each time Pepsi's ambassador fell from grace or simply moved on, Pepsi's relevance dipped with them. Coke's icons weren't celebrities, they were symbols, and symbols last longer than stars. The difference also shows up in global expansion. Coca-Cola mastered internationalization in ways Pepsi couldn't. In many countries, Coke embedded itself into local culture. It sponsored festivals, sports, even moments of national pride. In Mexico, for example, Coca-Cola became so ingrained that entire towns are culturally tied to it. In Africa, Coke's distribution network is legendary. It reached villages where even basic infrastructure didn't. Pepsi, by contrast, never achieved the same penetration. It tried, but it often came across as the foreign competitor. Coca-Cola wasn't just in the market, it was the market. One of the clearest moments of Pepsi's overreach came in the Soviet Union. In the 1970s, Pepsi made a groundbreaking deal to be the first American consumer product sold in the USSR. It looked like a historic win, Pepsi beating Coke on communist soil. But the deal had strange economics. Pepsi accepted payment in vodka and later in Soviet warships, because rubles couldn't be converted into dollars. It became more of a novelty than a lasting strategy. Meanwhile, Coca-Cola waited. And once the Soviet Union collapsed, Coke stormed in with full force, backed by global infrastructure and a brand already associated with freedom and Western life. Pepsi had entered first, but Coke won long-term. It's a recurring theme. Pepsi landed punches, Coke won wars. Another important angle is adaptability. You might think Pepsi was the more adaptable one, always changing with trends. But adaptability isn't about chasing. It's about anticipating shifts and aligning with core values. Coca-Cola adapted to health trends by introducing Diet Coke, then Coke Zero, and expanding into water and juice, while still keeping the Coke identity intact. Pepsi, however, stumbled. Its Pepsi Max or Pepsi One lines never carried the same weight. And as soda consumption declined in the US in the 2010s, Coke's clarity helped it navigate the storm. Pepsi, split between snacks and drinks, couldn't send a strong message. Was it about fun? Was it about health? Was it about culture? The brand voice got diluted. The irony is, Pepsi did innovate in some ways Coca-Cola didn't. It leaned earlier into sweeteners, experimented with bold flavors, pushed digital campaigns aggressively. But those wins were tactical. They didn't build strategic dominance. Because at the end of the day, a brand war isn't about being the flashiest. It's about owning the mental real estate of consumers. Coke owned happiness, tradition, refreshment. Pepsi floated between value, youth, and cool. Which one feels more permanent? Which one would your grandmother recognize and your children also connect to? That's Coke's edge. Think about the advertising tone as well. Coke ads rarely attack Pepsi directly. They stand on their own, radiating confidence. Pepsi ads, however, often position themselves against Coke. The choice of a new generation. Take the Pepsi challenge. Every comparison reinforced Coca-Cola as the benchmark. It's a subtle but deadly mistake. If your brand identity depends on your rival's existence, you're already second place. Coke didn't need Pepsi to define itself. Pepsi needed Coke to define itself. That asymmetry sealed their fates. There's also the question of nostalgia. Nostalgia is one of the most powerful tools in marketing. Coca-Cola understood that from the start. Its ads leaned into collective memory, family rituals, timeless scenes. Drinking Coke wasn't just refreshment. It was reliving moments. Pepsi's focus on youth meant it struggled to build nostalgia. After all, if you're always targeting the next generation, you're constantly shedding the old one. Coke, on the other hand, kept adding layers. Each generation inherited the Coke story. Pepsi kept resetting it. That's why today, when someone looks at a Coke bottle, they don't just see a drink. They see a lifetime of memories, commercials, and cultural imprints. Pepsi doesn't trigger the same emotional archive. And then, there's the matter of trust. When Coca-Cola stumbled with new Coke, it recovered by listening and restoring the original. That honesty rebuilt trust. Pepsi, however, stumbled more quietly but more often. Rebrands, failed campaigns, confusing product launches. They signaled instability. Over time, that erodes trust. Consumers might enjoy Pepsi in the moment, but Coke felt safer, more reliable, more eternal. Let's not forget one of the strangest contrasts of all: the company's names themselves. Coca-Cola rolls off the tongue like poetry. Symmetrical, rhythmic, instantly recognizable worldwide. It feels classic. Pepsi is short, sharp, almost abrupt. The name came from dyspepsia, meaning indigestion, since the drink was originally meant as a digestive aid. It's not a bad name, but it lacks the grandeur and lyrical resonance of Coca-Cola. In global branding, even sound matters. And Coke sounds like a legend. Pepsi sounds like an option. But maybe the most damning factor for Pepsi is this: Coca-Cola created a world while Pepsi sold a drink. Coke's red and white colors, its iconic glass bottle, its connection to music, movies, sports, and holidays, it built an entire universe of associations. Pepsi tried to build moments, but never a world. And when you don't own a world, you don't own permanence. As the 21st century progressed, this became clearer. Soda consumption as a whole began to decline in developed countries, as people shifted toward healthier options. Both Coke and Pepsi faced existential threats. But Coca-Cola leaned into its brand world, using it to extend into new categories. Coke could put its name on water, teas, coffees, and people still trusted it. Pepsi's extensions never carried the same power. Instead, PepsiCo's identity became increasingly tied to snacks, successful in their own right, but separating Pepsi from being seen as a global drink leader. The once fierce rivalry faded into something less equal. Coke became the global giant. Pepsi became the runner-up, comfortable but no longer truly threatening. And yet, the Pepsi versus Coke story isn't just about them. It's a mirror for any brand, any company, even any individual trying to stand out. Do you chase trends, or do you build timeless identity? Do you define yourself against others, or do you stand alone? Do you create moments, or do you create worlds? Pepsi teaches us that even brilliant campaigns, clever stunts, and temporary wins mean little without a core identity that lasts. Coca-Cola teaches us that owning emotions beats owning comparisons. And that's why, even after 100 years, when people think of soda, they don't say, "I'll have a Pepsi." They say, "I'll have a Coke." But let's dig even deeper, because the Coke versus Pepsi rivalry is also a story about how humans relate to symbols. At the surface level, it's sugar water. But nobody lines up for decades just to sip sugar water. They line up for meaning. Coca-Cola became a symbol of America, of optimism, of togetherness. Even in times of hardship, Coke managed to tie itself to something bigger than the product. During World War II, it was patriotism. During the space race, astronauts drank Coke. During the holiday season, Santa and polar bears kept it timeless. The drink became shorthand for joy. And when something becomes shorthand for joy, it stops being compared. It simply is. Pepsi, by contrast, tried to attach itself to rebellion, youth, and celebrity. But those symbols age quickly. Youth today is old tomorrow. Celebrities rise and fall. The symbol collapses as soon as the spotlight moves on. That's why Pepsi always had to fight for attention, while Coke quietly owned the stage. This symbolic depth explains why Coke not only dominates shelves, but also memories. Ask yourself, what's the most iconic Pepsi ad you can remember? Maybe Michael Jackson dancing. Maybe Britney Spears in a glittering costume. Fun, flashy, but specific to a time. Now ask the same about Coke. You might think of "I'd Like to Buy the World a Coke," a song from the 1970s that still resonates. You might think of the red trucks rolling through snowy streets at Christmas, glowing with lights. You might think of a simple glass bottle sweating on a hot day. These aren't bound to a decade. They're timeless images. And timelessness is the ultimate power in branding. The irony is, Pepsi often had sharper creative executions. The Pepsi challenge was clever. The Michael Jackson commercial was electric. The Kendall Jenner ad was infamous. But Coke didn't rely on cleverness. It relied on resonance. Cleverness makes people clap. Resonance makes people remember. And when decades pass, memory is everything. Pepsi fought for claps. Coke fought for hearts. Guess which one lasts longer? Another underappreciated factor is restraint. Coca-Cola rarely overextended itself in tone. It didn't try to be edgy, controversial, or hyper-relevant to politics. It stuck to universal themes: happiness, family, sharing. Pepsi, in its pursuit of cool, often wandered into risky territory. Sometimes it worked, often it didn't. The Kendall Jenner fiasco is the clearest example. An attempt to link Pepsi to global protest movements backfired because the symbolism was too shallow. Coke, by staying above the fray, never risked trivializing itself. And over decades, that restraint built an aura of dignity. Now you might wonder, isn't Pepsi still successful? Absolutely. PepsiCo is a massive company. Its snack division alone dominates supermarkets. Doritos, Lay's, Gatorade, Quaker Oats. The portfolio is gigantic. In some ways, PepsiCo the corporation is stronger financially than Coca-Cola, because it isn't reliant on just beverages. But that strength highlights the weakness of Pepsi the brand. When you think Pepsi, do you think of a timeless symbol of refreshment? Or do you think of a soda you drink if Coke isn't available? That's the crux. Pepsi, the company, thrives. Pepsi, the drink, lingers in second place. And branding is about perception, not spreadsheets. Coca-Cola also managed to tie itself to rituals in ways Pepsi never did. Birthdays, holidays, summer barbecues, family dinners. Coke positioned itself as the drink that belongs there. You rarely hear people talk about Pepsi in that context. Rituals matter because they anchor products to repeated behavior. When a brand becomes part of a ritual, it locks itself into the subconscious. Pepsi chased attention. Coke chased ritual. Ritual wins every time. What's fascinating is how this story reflects larger truths about life and strategy. In business, it's tempting to chase short-term wins. The viral campaign, the celebrity partnership, the clever stunt. That's Pepsi's playbook. But the companies that endure think long-term. They build identity patiently. They sacrifice quick thrills for deep roots. That's Coca-Cola's playbook. The same applies to people. You can chase every trend, constantly reinvent yourself to be noticed. Or you can define who you are and let time make you iconic. The world remembers icons, not trend chasers. But here's the final twist. The rivalry never ends. Pepsi will always exist, poking, prodding, trying to capture the new generation. Coke will always loom, steady and unshakable. And in that dynamic, Pepsi serves a purpose. It keeps Coke alert. It prevents complacency. Without Pepsi, Coca-Cola might not have fought so hard to stay relevant, to protect its brand. Rivals sharpen rivals. So in a strange way, Pepsi's losses ensured Coke's greatness. Today, when you walk down a supermarket aisle, the shelves tell the story. Coke commands eye-level, bold red, instantly visible. Pepsi sits beside it, blue, familiar but secondary. And millions of tiny choices repeat the pattern. At restaurants, bars, celebrations, the phrase slips out naturally. "I'll take a Coke." Sometimes the server replies, "Is Pepsi okay?" That single question sums up the entire war. One brand is the request. The other is the substitute. So why did Pepsi lose ground to Coca-Cola? Because Coke understood something Pepsi didn't. Products don't win wars. Stories do. Identity does. Ritual does. Pepsi fought for moments. Coke built a myth. And myths, once written into culture, are almost impossible to erase. And maybe that's the real takeaway. Whether you're building a company, a brand, or just your own identity in the world, you face the same choice. Do you fight for attention, or do you fight for meaning? Do you chase the next flash, or do you build something timeless? Pepsi shows us the cost of chasing. Coca-Cola shows us the power of staying true. And in that contrast lies a lesson far bigger than soda. So the next time you crack open a drink, ask yourself, are you reaching for refreshment or for a ritual? If it's Coke, chances are it's both. And that's why Pepsi lost ground. Subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden battles behind the brands we think we know.